Hello and welcome to another episode of In Focus brought to you by the Uongozi Institute. I am your host, Gwamaka Kifukwe. On tonight's program, we have the second and final part of our interview with Dr. Carlos Lopez, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And we've been discussing the importance and role of knowledge and innovation for Africa's transformation. I hope you enjoy the program. This next question I have for you is a bit more ideological. And I think to ask it very basically, what drives innovation? Should we have government policy and government heavily involved in driving innovation in key sectors that it identifies? Or should we open it up to the market and see what happens? Or can we find some kind of balance in between? And I ask this because, as we know, we have challenges in Africa, and we've already identified some of them. And how do we sort of ensure that innovation is taking place in the areas that we want them to? And actually, can we do that? And then, as a kind of follow-up, how do we identify the sectors that we need innovation in?
Well, I really believe in this particular moment, most of the innovation is coming from very specific environments in Africa. Like, for instance, Nairobi is a very good innovation hub for the continent. So if you try to understand what are the ingredients that make that possible, it's not necessarily government policy. It's a combination of factors, from the fact that it's cosmopolitan, the fact that you have the right infrastructure that will be conducive for this type of developments, a certain liberal undercurrent in terms of the way the government policies run, the fact that you have a high concentration of young people, a number of private sector activities in the area of education. So you can really look in more detail into the various factors that make this possible. And you see it a bit reproducing in Accra, you see it a bit taking place in Cape Town, you see certainly the same in Cairo, Casablanca. So there are not that many cities that have this combination of factors. And I think we have to be very attentive to understand the sociology that is behind these hubs of innovation. But one thing that seems to be very clear is that they don't emerge out of government policy. It's not like Ministry X has decreed that we are going to have an innovation lab, that it happens. It's just this combination of factors and a free flow of ideas that make it possible. Countries that are not cosmopolitan enough are never a good bet for innovation. If you look into the US, the reason why they are the leaders on innovation in so many areas is precisely because they are so cosmopolitan. And the reason why a country like Japan and Korea still today is seen as an imitator rather than a creator is because they are not cosmopolitan enough. They sort of catch up in making technology much more precise and making technology much more productive by repeating to exhaustion the quality of the operations that will make this more productive, and therefore they take the leadership out of that process. But they are not the creators in the first place. You wouldn't say that, they created the smartphone, or they created this, or they created that. So this is very interesting. And I think Africa has to take a bit of an interest in leading innovation in areas that are close to its assets. For instance, we have incredible assets in terms of agriculture. We look at a country like Brazil that had more or less the same characteristics as Africa. Huge tracts of arable land to be explored. And a couple of very innovative developments in terms of enhanced seeds and the like made transformative agriculture in Brazil the winner. And that is really the way Brazil propelled itself. Right now we have 60% of non-used arable land of the world. we are proud of mentioning this all the time, and we do nothing about it because our agricultural productivity is still the lowest. What is the investment that we are making in this field? What is being done on agribusiness, for instance? Is there an interest in this type of activity in the continent? Well, I can tell you, yes, for instance, in Southern Africa, some countries, yes, for Morocco, but the majority not. And people kind of look the other way. If you are young, you think of something else but agriculture.
Yeah, go to the cities.
You go to the cities and so on. But there is all reasons to think the other way around. I mean, you can be very rich if you are really betting on agriculture in the continent. And I think we have to look into these possibilities of marrying some of the technological innovations. Like, for instance, there is IT developments in Kenya that are now geared towards agriculture. And I think this is the kind of phenomena that we will have to populate. But right now, it's far apart, and you don't have much of it.
So how do we foster that kind of innovation climate or culture that you just mentioned? Because on the one hand, we do have to foster it and prepare and have this space for people to innovate. But on the other hand, we also need to prepare people for the consequences of innovation. So as you mentioned, if we mechanize agriculture, you'll see more and more people leaving the land, and that will lead to urbanization. So how do we, on the one hand, foster this kind of climate or culture of innovation, and on the other, prepare the youth and prepare ourselves for what that innovation and what the changes that innovation will bring will mean to us?
I think the major challenge is going to be to change our education systems, because they are sort of old-fashioned. They don't take into account what is available right now digitally. Open source started a revolution that now has got into e-learning. E-learning has become massive open courses. Massive open courses give us access to a body of knowledge that is not available in the universities themselves. Forget about struggling to get more books into your university library. You can get an entire world library digitally. So that's one factor. We need to rethink our educational systems, and particularly our universities. They have to completely overhaul the way they approach the business. Second, we need to value networking much more, because all innovation comes from networking. Both networking at the level of a country or at the level of the continent, but we should not be too nationalistic about it. It's network with anybody, because that's what creates really the energy that allows for us to respond to what the technology today is offering. Any individual has access to levels of information that our parents could not even dream. And they don't need to make much of an effort for it. Even if they don't have the means to buy a computer, they can go to a cyber cafe, or they can borrow for 1 hour friend's computer, or something happens. And we know it is happening because the statistics prove it. The level of internet penetration in Africa is going up about 300% a year, although it comes from a low base. So this is happening. This access to knowledge. Now, what we do with it? We can transform it in just a trivial pursuit of fun and entertainment, or we can transform it into something that is really going to change our lives. And I think we need, in this case, I really believe in the power of the public intervention, contrary to creating labs or creating centers of innovation, etc. It's about making sure that access to digital information is democratized, and it's about changing our educational systems to respond to the fact that now we have a body of knowledge that is available.
So just to take a step back, what is the role of regional and even global organizations such as UNECA in this process?
Most of the international organizations, and the UN is included, are a bit old. They have a difficult time adjusting to the new challenges, the new world. Normally they were basically created around negotiated platforms that are no longer valid. Like, for instance, the donor-recipient relationship was very prominent in all the programmatic way these organizations used to work. And today is a bit laughable. I mean, who cares about what the donor says or doesn't say? I mean, it's not like just 20 years ago, which was really important. You know, you couldn't do anything without having some sort of a donor legitimacy, let alone their money. Just their legitimacy was already important. If you were not recognized by, you know, an expert, you know, you were a nobody. Now today, you know, who cares about what the expert says? I'm my own, and you know, people are asserting themselves, and this is because today's trade is 46% South-South, and you know, in about 10 years, it's going to be 54%, and you know, that's the area that is growing. So the South is trading much more with each other, and that is just one symbolic way of saying the South now is learning with each other. So it has become horizontal. It's not anymore vertical. It's not north-south. It's horizontal. If it is horizontal, what is the relevance of these organizations? You know, the way they are structured, the way they are organized, was very much vertical. Now they have to deal with the horizontal world. So they are struggling. And UNECA is no exception, but of course, I have my own ideas about how the reform of UNECA should position it to be a completely different organization that responds to the challenges of today. But I'm trapped sometimes with the bureaucracy and the way the all UN still works. I mean, UNECA cannot detach itself from the rest of the UN. And the UN is, you know, moving slowly in a direction that I hope is the best, but, you know, it's struggling. You look into the other international organizations, forget about the UN, it's probably even more compelling what people say about the World Bank, about the IMF, about the OECD, about the various regional organizations, including the AU. Everybody is sort of in a dearth of change. They say, but they are too bureaucratic, which is a euphemism to say they are too slow. You know, and you know, the speed is now imposed by the digital world, which is, you know, you don't have anymore a 1 week news cycle. You don't have anymore a 24-hour news cycle. You have an on time news cycle. You know, everybody's watching the news anytime they want in their phone that they have in the pocket, anytime they want. So this is a very different world. It needs speed that these organizations are struggling to get.
But just to stick with this theme of kind of broader regional bodies in terms of what they can do for innovation and so forth. Time and time again, we're seeing that we have these conferences, these summits, these workshops and so forth, where you have great ideas that come forward, we have great policies, and generally there's a feel-good factor, as it were, about Africa. And yet, time and time again, we hear that implementation is a problem. And this continues to be across all sectors. Now, as I see it, or as maybe we can agree to see it, as it were, there's a tension between national agendas and some of these regional agreements. And sometimes you find that agreeing on something up here, for example, might not match what your constituents want back home. Now, how do you marry kind of these two agendas and make sure that even in a sector like innovation, that you can have some kind of cohesion?
Well, some obvious things have been done. Like, for instance, making sure that the three most important Pan-African institutions, the African Union, the African Development Bank, and ourselves, the Economic Commission for Africa, are not, you know, going in different directions. That we have some commonality of interests, some commonality of purpose, and that we have a certain number of joint programs, joint activities that are going to shape the agenda of the continent. That is sort of obvious, so it has been done. Then, you know, the definition of priorities is also key. You have to get processes going that will make these priorities structured in a way that, you know, basically become part of the continent's agenda. That has also been done. And the biggest demonstration is the setting up of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want in the future. And it was a process launched in the 50th anniversary of the OAU last year. But then you have the more complex issue, which is now when we get to the practicalities, how are we going to transform those goals into implementable bits? And here, our contribution has been to make sure that Africans set their own development goals, not the universal ones, the ones that they set themselves.
Specific to our context.
And the ones they set, they are there in different frameworks that they have approved over the years in different political processes. There is one for agriculture, there is one for mining, there is one for innovation, there is one for human resources, for health. There are 16 of those, I have counted. And the problem is, how do we get accountability that all these frameworks approved by the political processes are being implemented? There is no accountability. This year is the year of agriculture in Africa, so the summits of the African Union will discuss agriculture, but then probably will forget next year because there is another theme, and then the following year yet another theme. This is no accountability system. We need something that is really solid. So for that, you need to have measurable targets. You need to have your goalposts, you have to measure them, and you have to, like in corporation, be able to present your results at the end of each year. Where are you in terms of what was to be achieved? So we are calling that process African Development Goals and setting up it in such a shape that for each African Union summit, the heads of state discuss these deliverables against goals that they have set. Another example I can give you is the regional integration index idea. We have been discussing regional integration forever. You just mentioned it. We don't trade with each other and so on. Well, trade has been the only visible way of measuring our integration in economic terms. But in fact, it's a very, I would say, limited way of looking into economic integration that is much more broader. It includes infrastructure, it includes skills, mobility, it includes a number of other factors, financial transactions, you name it. So it should not be confined to just trade in the traditional sense. And we lacked an instrument that would allow us to actually measure what each country is doing to implement an integrative agenda. And the moment you put, a certain number of indicators of things that you are going to follow, you have to be very practical. Like, for instance, we are looking into issues such as visa regimes. How many days you require to get a visa to travel to another African country? Which countries require visas for other African countries, which do not, and for what reasons? And and then you put sort of a combination of ingredients in judging the visa regimes that allow you to give a notation from 1 to 10 in terms of these ones are more advanced, these ones are the least advanced. Then you have one category. And then you create categories for many issues of this sort. And then you have your index for regional integration. And then you rank the countries. Once you rank the countries, you have a very, very, very different discussion, because you are naming and shaming the countries in terms of what they have done or not for regional integration. Right now, you can get away with a lot of discourse about regional integration without doing nothing. You just need to have good rhetoric. But with an instrument like this, you are going to oblige implementation to be the real discussion.
Unfortunately, we're running a little bit short on time, but there are two more questions that I'd like to ask you. Coming back to this African Economic Conference and the topic for this year, what is it that you hope to achieve or to set out or to gain from this dialogue?
Well, we conceived these African Economic Conferences as an opportunity to give the younger intellectuals an opportunity to participate in the debates about the African agenda. So the aim is really to call for papers from people that are between masters and PhD type of situation, and ask them to contribute with papers. And then we have some gurus in the subject area that also come from the continent that dialogue with these young people. I think it has been very interesting for both the institutions that organize these conferences, ourselves, African Development Bank, and the UN Development Program, because we learn so much about the new trends and what is really of interest to the younger generation in terms of economic development. And I think, you know, innovation is a topic that they will love, and they will come with many ideas. So instead of having a preset defined agenda of what we would like the conference to conclude, it's more of an open possibility of brainstorming around the topic. And of course, we present, you know, the latest developments in terms of institutional policies in the area. And these participants, they present much more areas of research that are of interest to them, but within this umbrella framework of you know, development of the continent. So I'm very excited about organizing this year around the issue of innovation, because I know it's a topic that the young people will react with passion and interest.
And so in closing, do you have any other kind of message that you would like to give to our audience, especially African leadership that may be watching this?
Well, I have been very pleased with the fact that over the last years, African leaders, and when I say African leaders, I don't mean just the political leaders, but the leadership in a broad sense, have been very passionate about industrialization and about diversification of the economies. This is nothing new. We have actually done it in the 70s, and we failed completely. You know, everything that was tried in terms of industrialization at that time didn't really succeed, with the exception maybe of 2 or 3 countries. But this time is very different, because we have learned from the 70s. We are in a very different economic shape. Our economic size is much bigger, and the opportunities that are offered to us are much more exciting than what we could afford about 40, 50 years ago. So I would like the African leaders to continue in this road of passion and interest and commitment towards diversification of the economies, for one reason, not just because we want to be as modern as the others and we want to be as developed as the others, but because this is socially the right thing to do. It's the only way we are going to be able to create as many jobs as we need for the younger generation.
Well, on that note, thank you very much for coming onto the program, and welcome back anytime. It's been a pleasure discussing with you, and hopefully we'll have a chance to do so again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.